They handcuffed him without hesitation. An old man, quiet, wearing a medal they said he didn't earn. People whispered, "Stolen valor." Another liar. He didn't shout, didn't beg, didn't defend himself. Because real warriors don't explain their scars. Inside the courtroom, the judge was already tired of him. Another case. Another fake hero. But then, the judge asked to see the medal. Just one look changed everything. The room went silent. The laughter stopped, and the judge's face went pale. Because that medal wasn't just real. It carried a history no one in that room was ready to face. Stay with me, because what happens next turns shame into respect and judgment into regret. They noticed him outside the courthouse first, an old man standing near the steps, holding himself straight despite the years weighing on his shoulders. His jacket was worn, his shoes scuffed, and the medal on his chest looked out of place to some, too shiny for someone who looked like he'd lost everything else. A young officer frowned. "Sir, where did you get that medal?" The old man looked at him calmly. "I earned it. That should have been the end of it." But it wasn't. Another officer stepped closer. Then another. Voices lowered. Eyes narrowed. Someone whispered the words that cut deeper than any blade. "Stolen valor." People love heroes, but only the kind that look the part. Within minutes, the old man was surrounded. He didn't resist as they placed the cuffs on his wrists. He didn't argue when they read him his rights. He only glanced once at the medal, as if apologizing to it. Inside the police car, the city passed by like a stranger. Buildings, flags, faces that had no idea what that medal had cost. At the station, paperwork moved faster than compassion. Name taken, photo snapped, charge written, stolen valor, a crime of lies, except this one was built on assumptions. When they asked him again where he got the medal, he answered the same way. "I earned it." No speech, no defense, just truth. By the time he was led into the courtroom, the room already had an opinion of him. People glanced up, then looked away. A few smirked. A few shook their heads. Another fake hero exposed. The judge entered, robe flowing, eyes already tired. He scanned the room, then the defendant. Old, poor, silent. He sighed. "Let's get this over with." The old man stood there, hands cuffed, back straight. The posture never left him. Because some habits are trained into your bones. And he was about to remind everyone in that room what real valor looks like. The courtroom felt colder than it should have. Not because of the air, but because of the way people looked at him. The old veteran stood alone at the defense table, hands still cuffed in front of him. The medal lightly pressed against his thin wrists, but he didn't flinch. Pain had long ago learned it couldn't scare him. Behind him, whispers moved like insects. "Look at him. Probably bought that medal online." Disgusting. He stared straight ahead, eyes fixed on the wooden seal behind the judge's bench. He had stood in worse places than this. Louder places, bloodier places. A courtroom didn't frighten him. The judge adjusted his glasses and glanced down at the file. "Name?" he asked without looking up. The old man answered calmly. The judge nodded, flipping pages. "You're charged with stolen valor, wearing a military decoration you did not earn. Do you understand the seriousness of this offense?" "Yes, Your Honor." His voice didn't shake. That annoyed the prosecutor. She stood, sharp and confident, already convinced of victory. "Your Honor, cases like this are unfortunately common," she said, pacing slightly. "Individuals fabricate military service to gain sympathy or respect. This defendant was found wearing a Valor medal without any proof of service." She held up a photograph of the medal, enlarged on a screen. A few people in the gallery scoffed. The judge glanced at the image. "Do you have documentation, sir?" he asked the old man. "No, Your Honor." A ripple of quiet laughter passed through the room. The prosecutor smiled. "No discharge papers. No service record. No witnesses," she continued. "And yet he insists the medal is his." The judge leaned back. "Sir," he said, finally looking directly at the old man, "this is your opportunity to explain yourself." The room waited. The old man breathed in slowly. "I earned it," he said again. "Nothing more." The judge frowned. "That is not an explanation." Still, the old man said nothing. Because how do you explain things that happen in smoke and screaming? How do you put words to men who never came home? The prosecutor seized the moment. Your Honor, this behavior is typical. These individuals cling to a fantasy. The medal is likely a replica. The judge nodded, already tired. Bailiff, he said, remove the medal and submit it as evidence. The bailiff stepped forward and reached for the old man's chest. For the first time, the old man reacted, not with anger, with urgency. Please, he said quietly, be careful. The bailiff paused, surprised by the tone. He unclasped the medal and placed it on a velvet tray. As the medal touched the light, something changed. It wasn't dramatic. Not yet. But the judge leaned forward. He squinted. This doesn't look like a replica, he murmured. The courtroom grew quieter. The judge gestured. Bring it here. The bailiff approached the bench and handed it over. The judge turned the medal over slowly. Then he froze. On the back, barely visible, was an engraved service number. A real one. The judge's jaw tightened. Clerk, he said, run this number. The prosecutor shifted uncomfortably. Minutes passed. The old man stood silently, eyes lowered. He had waited longer than this before. Finally, the clerk's voice broke the silence. Your Honor, this number is valid. The room stiffened. Service branch? The judge asked. Classified operations unit. The clerk said hesitantly. Records partially sealed. The prosecutor's confidence cracked. That doesn't prove. The judge raised a hand. Enough. He stared at the old man now, not with annoyance, but with something close to respect. Sir, the judge said quietly, where did you serve? The old man hesitated. Then, for the first time, he looked up. Places that don't exist anymore, he said. The words hit the room like a weight. The judge swallowed, and then he noticed something else. The way the old man stood, the way he held his shoulders, the way his eyes never wandered. Those weren't the habits of a liar. Those were the habits of someone who had been trained and never stopped being one. The judge leaned back slowly, and for the first time since the case began, he wasn't sure who was on trial anymore. The courtroom no longer felt impatient. It felt alert. Every eye was on the old man now, not with mockery, but with curiosity, the kind that comes when a story refuses to stay simple. The judge removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Classified operations, he repeated slowly. That EXP lanes the lack of public records. The prosecutor stood again, but her voice lacked its earlier sharpness. Your Honor, she said carefully, sealed records can be misleading. Without full verification, the judge raised his hand. We will proceed carefully, he said. Then he turned to the old man. Sir, you said you served in places that don't exist anymore. Can you be more specific? The old man's lips pressed together. No, Your Honor. A murmur rolled through the room. The judge studied him. You understand that your silence could still result in conviction. I understand. And yet you choose not to explain. The old man nodded once. I was ordered not to. That sentence changed the temperature of the room. The judge leaned forward. By whom? The old man hesitated just long enough to show the weight of the answer. Men who never put their names on paper, he said. The prosecutor sat down slowly. The judge glanced at the clerk again. Is there any unit attached to this service number? The clerk's fingers flew across the keyboard. Yes, Your Honor, but access requires federal clearance. The judge exhaled sharply. Call the liaison. The courtroom waited as a phone call was placed. The silence stretched. The old man stood motionless, as if time had stopped for him long ago. Finally, the clerk covered the receiver and whispered to the judge. Your Honor, they're sending someone. The doors at the back of the courtroom opened 20 minutes later. A man entered who didn't look like he belonged to the public. Clean suit, military posture, eyes that scanned before he walked. He approached the bench and handed over credentials. The judge examined them carefully, then stood. The entire courtroom rose instinctively. The man leaned in and spoke quietly. The judge listened and listened. Then his face changed. Not shock, recognition. The judge nodded slowly and handed the credentials back. Thank you, he said. You may sit. The man turned, and instead of sitting in the gallery, he walked toward the old man. He stopped 2 feet away and did something no one expected. He came to attention. Sharp, precise. Then he saluted. The sound of boots clicking echoed in the room. Gasps filled the courtroom. The man spoke clearly. "Permission to speak, Your Honor." "Granted." This man is a decorated veteran of a classified unit formed during a period when we needed soldiers who could not exist officially. The prosecutor's face drained of color. He was awarded that medal in a closed ceremony. His name was removed from public records by order of command. The judge's voice was low. "For what actions?" The man swallowed. "For leading a mission that extracted 37 hostages from an enemy-held compound. He stayed behind to cover the exit." "What happened to the rest of his team?" the judge asked. The man paused. "They didn't make it back." The courtroom fell into absolute silence. The old man lowered his eyes. The man continued. "He was presumed dead, declared non-operational. The system failed to reinstate him." The judge slowly sat down. "You're telling me," he said carefully, "that this man lost his team, his identity, and his record?" "Yes, Your Honor." The judge looked at the old man again. "And you never corrected it?" The old man shook his head. "I was told the mission mattered more than my name." Something inside the judge broke. The prosecutor stood, voice trembling. "Your Honor, I withdraw all charges." The judge didn't respond immediately. Instead, he turned to the bailiff. "Remove the cuffs." The click of metal opening sounded louder than the gavel. The old man rubbed his wrists once, not from pain but from habit. The judge stood. "I owe you an apology," he said. The old man looked up. "I don't need one," he replied quietly. "Just don't let it happen to the next one." The judge swallowed hard. Around them, people stood frozen. They had walked in ready to watch a fraud exposed. They were witnessing a hero revealed, and the shame belonged to everyone else. The judge didn't sit back down. That alone told the room something historic was happening. He straightened his robe, cleared his throat, and looked out over the courtroom. Not as a man in authority, but as a man facing a truth he had nearly failed to recognize. "Everyone," he said firmly, "remained standing." No one moved. The judge turned to the old veteran. "You were brought into this courtroom in handcuffs," he said, voice steady but heavy. "Accused of lying, of dishonoring service you did not earn." He paused. That accusation was wrong. A murmur swept through the gallery. The judge raised his voice slightly. "This court formally recognizes you as a decorated veteran of the United States military, wrongfully detained and wrongfully accused." He nodded to the bailiff. "Return his medal." The bailiff approached with reverence now, holding the medal like a sacred object. He carefully placed it back onto the old man's chest, adjusting it so it sat perfectly. The old man's hand trembled, not from weakness, but from memory. The judge stepped down from the bench. Gasps filled the room. Judges don't do that. He stood face to face with the old veteran. "On behalf of this court," the judge said, swallowing hard, "and on behalf of a system that failed you, I apologize." Then he did the unthinkable. He extended his hand. The old man hesitated only a moment before taking it. The courtroom erupted into applause. Not loud, not chaotic, but deep and sustained. The kind of applause that comes from collective shame turning into respect. The prosecutor stood frozen, then slowly placed her files down. She walked toward the old man. "I was wrong," she said quietly. "And I'm sorry." He nodded once. "That's enough," he replied. The man in the suit, the liaison, turned to the judge. "With your permission, Your Honor," he said, "there's more." The judge nodded. "We've contacted surviving members connected to his unit," the liaison continued. "They're here." The doors opened again. One by one, men entered. Older now, some with canes, some with scars, all with the same posture. They lined up, and every single one of them saluted the old man. Tears flowed freely now from the gallery, from the clerk, from officers who had once doubted him. The judge's voice cracked. "Court is adjourned," he said softly. But no one moved, because something far more important than a trial was happening. Recognition. The ceremony was held a week later. Not in a courtroom, but under open sky. Flags stood tall, snapping gently in the wind. Rows of chairs filled with civilians, officers, veterans, and families who had learned the old man's name for the first time. He stood at the center of it all, still wearing the same worn jacket, still uncomfortable with attention. A senior officer stepped forward. "Today," he said, "we correct a mistake that lasted decades." The old veteran listened quietly as the citation was read aloud. The mission, the extraction, the sacrifice. When the officer reached the end, his voice faltered. "For extraordinary valor beyond the call of duty." The medal was pinned again, officially this time. The crowd stood. Salutes filled the air. The old man looked out at the faces before him. "I didn't come back a hero," he said finally. "I came back because my men didn't." Silence. "I don't need statues. I don't need praise," he continued. "Just remember, not every hero looks the way you expect." The judge was there too, standing among the people now. Later, as the crowd dispersed, he approached the old man. "Thank you," the judge said. The old man smiled faintly. "Just do better next time," he replied. That evening, the old man walked away alone, medal resting against his heart, identity finally restored. He disappeared into the crowd. But this time, everyone knew exactly who he was.